let's go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome everybody to the August 3rd Thursday Web Forum for the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy, or SECAS. I'm Hillary Morris, and as always, I work on user support and communications for the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. We host this web forum on the third Thursday of every month right here at 10 a.m. Eastern Time as an opportunity to share the latest updates about the blueprint, get input and involvement from folks like you all, and highlight exciting science and action in the world of landscape conservation in our region. Here is our agenda today. I'll start by introducing our speakers who have about 40 minutes of content for today. We'll wrap up with some Q&A and discussion, and then I'll end by previewing next month's webinar so you all know what to expect. You've probably seen that I am recording this web forum. We always do that just as an option for the couple of folks who inevitably wanted to be here but had a conflict. I will post that to the calendar event on the SECAS website within a couple of days. Does anyone have questions or comments before we get started? All right, not hearing any. Let me introduce our speakers for today. We're going to be hearing from a dynamic duo with US OpenStreetMap project. Jess Beutler is the program director at OpenStreetMap US. OpenStreetMap US is a nonprofit organization that's working to advance geospatial data democracy in the United States by catalyzing collaborative action around OpenStreetMap between individuals, government agencies, nonprofits, corporations, and academia. Jess's work focuses on expanding the social impact of OpenStreetMap and its use for data democracy in the US through leading programs and projects such as the Public Domain Map, Mapping for Impact, and Teach OSM. Prior to working with OSM US, Jess led participatory mapping projects and supported OpenStreetMap communities across sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. Diane Fritz was elected to the OSM US Volunteer Board in 2021 and was re-elected in 2023. She's presently serving as the board's president. In her non-volunteer capacity, Diane teaches remote sensing and environmental modeling at the University of Colorado, Denver, and serves as the geospatial data scientist at that campus's academic library. So she helps students and faculty work with geospatial technology, including OSM data. She received her PhD in geology and hydrology from the University of Colorado Boulder and enjoys digging into environmental science questions. So we're very excited to have them here. SECAS staff have been using OpenStreetMap in the blueprint for several years. We started by using the street layers to help identify highly altered areas in the Southeast, and we quickly found that these data were super helpful for indicator development as well. The first indicator where we use the data is called greenways and trails. And that indicator looks at both the natural condition and the connected length of greenways in the Southeast to basically try to characterize the quality of the recreational experience. Now this year, as we started expanding consistent methods and indicators to Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands for the first time, we started finding new applications for OSM data, and we've incorporated some of the OSM data on parks into urban park size, data on historic sites into the low urban historic landscapes indicator. And the thing that we're incredibly excited about with OSM data as staff is that using OSM data puts the power in the hands of people like you all to actually improve the data and fix problems. Whereas with a lot of our indicators, as you all probably know, we're often waiting for the next National Land Cover Database release or waiting for the next update from a researcher of their species distribution models. So here, there's much less lag time because if you notice a problem with OSM, you want to add a missing park, you want to fix an error in a trail, you can do that yourself and we'll incorporate it the very next year. So I know that we're only scratching the surface of the potential of this amazing open data project, and we're really excited to have Jess and Diane here to talk about OpenStreetMap, what it can do, and provide some training on how to digitize and actually edit spatial information. So Diane, I'm handing off to you. Go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks. Thank you for having us. I wanted to mention that I was so tickled when Brecken reached out from SECAS to OpenStreetMap US and find that connection with us because, as Hillary mentioned, I am an instructor at a university and I had just been teaching how to do suitability analysis and kind of like a minimalist version of what SECAS is doing over the entire Southeast US. And so I was like, Jess, this is such a great opportunity to connect with this group. and also connect with a particular project Jess will go into in more detail called our Trails Stewardship Initiative, because there's a lot of symbiotic opportunity here. And so we're very excited to present, and Jess is going to go through this amazing slide deck that she's put together, and then I'm going to go into a demo afterwards in more detail about how you can contribute and be part of the OpenStreetMap community. Jess.
Thanks, Diane. And good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for hopping on and taking the time to learn about OpenStreetMap. You'll probably get a sense from Diane and I, but we are incredibly passionate about this work, and so always love to be able to share this with you all. So to get us started, I always like to be a little bit interactive with our presentations, so feel free in the chat. I'm going to ask a few questions. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So just diving into things, how many miles of road do you think exist in Florida? And I just randomly picked Florida. It's a southeast state, but anyone have any guesses? It can be all over the place. Type some guesses in the chat. $1 million, thanks. Yes, we got our first guess. Anyone else? 5,000, big range. 60,000. Okay, here we go. Okay, so from the sources that I found, it's over 275,000 miles of road in Florida. How about one more? How about the number of state parks, trails, and historic sites in Florida specifically? And these are the state managed properties. It's going to be a very different number. 500, 300. Ooh, someone said 150. That is so close. 175. And hopefully I got that number right. I took it from the Florida State Parks website. Okay, wrapping this up with one more question. How about the number of sidewalk curb cuts in the state of Florida? So those are those ramps that allow wheelchairs and other folks to get onto sidewalks a little bit easier. How many do you think that exist in the state of Florida? Not enough, yes, very true. Anyone want to guess on a number? 200,000, 5,000. Okay, this was a trick question. That's because nobody actually knows this number. And in fact, this is a common data set around the United States that even government agencies, municipal, federal, state, don't have a number on the number of curb cuts, which creates a challenge with trying to improve equitable infrastructure and other forms of development. This is just sidewalk curb cuts, but in fact, this is the case for tons of data sets. Oftentimes we take for granted that GIS data, map data just exist, and we assume that it's there and somebody has already mapped it before. But in fact, a lot of data that we need for various purposes, from conservation to equity to urban planning, that data hasn't already been mapped. So that's where OpenStreetMap comes in. So OpenStreetMap is the world's largest geospatial database that is freely editable, that anyone anywhere in the world can edit, contribute to, download, access that data. So if you care about curb cuts or parks or wheelchair accessibility in your neighborhood, the place where you live, you can be part of creating that data instead of, as Hillary mentioned, waiting for those data sets to come into existence. So you can be part of contributing to this global database. Oftentimes people just see OpenStreetMap in the corner of a map somewhere, but it's always really important for me to highlight that it is more than just a map. There's over 8 million contributors to OpenStreetMap around the world, and that's created this enormous community of individuals who are working together to solve some of our greatest challenges through map data. And because of that, it's become this interoperable data set between tons of different stakeholders, companies, communities around the world. So just to dive into some examples, the use of OpenStreetMap really kicked off in this impactful way in 2010 with the Haiti earthquake, when the Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders realized that they didn't have the data they needed to respond to the earthquake in Haiti. And ever since then, it's completely transformed how disaster response is implemented because this data is available through volunteer efforts. But beyond that, OpenStreetMap has also changed the game in how people participate in the data that represents them. So instead of having large entities control and manage all of the data that represents us and the policy decisions that impact our lives, that data is now being localized. So for example, this is an image of women in Tanzania. The woman in the middle, Asha there, she's teaching her community members how to map to understand pollution and waste issues in their area that's going to be used by their government for making policy decisions. And so that's the other area that OpenStreetMap has really changed the game, is being an additional data set that can contribute to government planning. And so OpenStreetMap, because of its coverage and how up to date it is being used by national, local, state level governments around the world, everything from the national census in Uganda to public health outreach in Guatemala. And because of this coverage and how up to date the data is through volunteer contributions, OpenStreetMap has become the database for thousands of companies, organizations around the world, ranging from AWS. I assume everyone here has gotten an Amazon package delivered to their house before. That's in part because of OpenStreetMap data. AWS or Amazon has mapped almost every driveway in the United States so that they could use that data as part of their operations. And it also includes Red Cross, United Nations. These are just a few examples of the entities around the world that have seen the value of OpenStreetMap and now rely on it. But this is not just outside of the US. OpenStreetMap has become very critical to different different sectors here in the United States as well, for identifying equitable infrastructure. We were talking about sidewalks and curb cuts earlier, but also disaster response. FEMA identified OpenStreetMap as one of the most up-to-date data sets after a disaster as part of their response toolkit. And conservation as well. OpenStreetMap has become a tool for understanding how people interact with their local environment, and it's used for a lot of different tool sets that help manage those interactions. So that's where OpenStreetMap US comes in. Hillary gave a wonderful introduction at the beginning, but just to recap, OpenStreetMap US is a nonprofit here in the US, and we work to convene all those partners, all of those different use cases, bringing together government agencies, volunteer contributors, companies, academia, nonprofits, bringing all these different actors together so that we can make an impact and use OpenStreetMap data for these different purposes. So diving into a couple quick examples of programs that we're running that might be of interest to you all here. First one is Public Domain Map. This is a project that we are working on in collaboration with federal agencies, particularly the U.S. Department of Transportation and USGS, to try to make OpenStreetMap more interoperable with federal data sets. Federal agencies are already using crowdsourcing and citizen contributions to their data, but that creates parallel work streams, volunteers contributing to different projects and different data sources we want to bring that together. We want to make sure that when folks are contributing data, it can go to both OpenStreetMap, that's used by these millions of users and thousands of companies and organizations, as well as federal data sets. So this is a project that's in development, but a good example of how we collaborate with federal partners to improve geospatial data in the United States. The other one that's of interest, and Diane mentioned this, is our Trail Stewardship Initiative. Real quick in the chat, how many people have ever used AllTrails or Gaia or Onyx or any other app to go hiking, explore the outdoors? Anyone here? Yes, Hillary. Yep. Okay, quite a few people. If you've used these applications before, you are using OpenStreetMap data. OpenStreetMap is the base map and data source for tons of applications, including these navigation apps. And so working with those companies, as well as land management agencies such as the US Forest Service, we're bringing together all of these different partners to make sure that the trail data that goes into these applications are providing the safest and most conservative, sorry, let me back up there, making sure that the data is keeping folks safe and also helping protect environmentally sensitive areas. We want to make sure that folks are staying on the trails that they should be staying on. And so we are working with all those partners to help improve trail data across the United States. So that's an overview of all the different ways that OpenStreetMap can be impactful and different organizations and entities that are using OSM. But how does that all work? Real quick in the chat again, how many folks have used OpenStreetMap or are familiar with it before I dive in? You can just say yes, or I have. Okay, a few people, great. Awesome, okay, so not completely unfamiliar, but hopefully showcasing some new ways for you on how it's been used. But just in case you aren't as familiar with OpenStreetMap and how it works behind the scenes, as I mentioned before, OpenStreetMap is a single geospatial database that everyone is contributing to. The majority of data comes in from volunteers who are tracing imagery or adding their local knowledge. Government and other entities can provide data that can be carefully imported with some processes, as well as corporations that are not only adding to the data, but providing a lot of support in data quality check, whether through their own automatic tools or providing other resources for keeping this data of the highest quality possible. And then that data is then immediately available to all of these different types of entities that need to use the data. But as you might know, OpenStreetMap is more than streets. I always make sure to mention that because in the name, OpenStreetMap, sometimes folks can think it's just streets, but it's so much more than that. In fact, just in the US alone, there's over 120,000 miles of sidewalks, over 200,000 miles of trails that have been mapped. Really anything that can be physically represented on a map can be added to OpenStreetMap. And the other benefit of this is that it is an open attribute system. So any information besides private data that you know about an object or a feature, that information can be added to the map through different tags. So how this looks in practice, looking at a few features that are of interest to this group. If we're to look at historic features in OpenStreetMap, you can add very basic information such as the name and type of feature that it is. But the great part about this volunteer community that can bring in tons of different information and knowledge is all of this other attribute information can exist for a single data point. So all the way down to, is this place wheelchair accessible? How many building levels exist? What is the Wikipedia page associated with this feature? Similarly, with parks and reserves, can add basic information. But look at all of this information that's been added for just a single park in Puerto Rico. It looks like folks have added the Arabic translation of the name, can put in information such as how to contact the park management, from the phone number, the website. All of this information has been added through the support of volunteers. And then Trails and Greenways was another one of interest to SECAS. And this one is really fascinating because there is so much information such as access, is it lit, what's the surface, all this information can be added for whatever purpose is needed. You never know what information folks need. It could be used for academia, it could be used for management, could be used for navigation, but that information is there and available, as well as some of these auxiliary data points also showing that there's a barrier, this gate. So there's other features that folks can add to help build the story of what it is on the ground. So who's adding this data and how is it kept up to date? Well, it's a lot of users like Wolfgang here. So just 2 months ago, he went through and updated this information. Actually, I reached out to him to make sure it was okay to use his picture in this. And he's like, yeah, I mapped this on my honeymoon. So if that says anything about the volunteer community in OpenStreetMap, folks are, any opportunity that they have, they're adding that information, keeping the data up to date as possible. But also, if you look closely, this particular data set was actually started from an import. So it came from an import, and then since then, users have updated and added additional information. So even if it comes from one source, that information can be constantly improved. So just to recap all of that, folks often ask how data gets into OSM, and there are a number of ways. Like I said, the majority of information is traced on satellite imagery, and that information is directly added by volunteers. But there are also other ways information is added, such as AI and machine learning data sets, as well as imported data. But those take a little bit more because we need to check and make sure that they conflate well with OpenStreetMap and that they meet the quality standards that we expect to have in the database. So definitely different ways that you can get the data in. So with that, I am going to pass it off to Diane.
All right, thanks, Jess. I'm going to share my screen and go through a demo about different ways to contribute to OpenStreetMap. So there are multiple ways, and what I'm going to demonstrate for everybody is just, if you are an individual mapper and you're going straight to openstreetmap.org, you can create an account. If you don't have one yet, instead of seeing my username here, you will see a sign up thing that will invite you, and you can pick your username, which you will use to interact with the community, because people give great feedback about, oh, you know, if you have questions, when you make an edit, you can post things that what you did, or ask a question, or people can have a conversation with you on the site. So this is an avenue to going straight into openstreetmap.org and picking where you would like to edit. There are also things called tasking managers, where if you have a large group of people editing and you want to organize them, you can set that front up, and that's also where public domain map is going to integrate into editing OpenStreetMap. But today, I'm just going to show you as an individual going straight into openstreetmap.org. I do want to share a place where you can go and reference this. I'll put this in the chat later, but to be able to self-guide yourself through what I'm going to show you, you can go to learnosm.org and go to this ID editor piece and see a lot of what I'm going to be trying to do today. And you can scroll down and it has all of these steps that you can self-guide through and go back and try and do what I'm going to be showing you right now. So let's zoom in to the Southeast US and take a look around a place where we might want to try and add some data and add some trails. So up here, as part of around Spring City, we're going to zoom into this area. And there are a lot of different parks and areas in here that we know that there are some trails that haven't been mapped, and some other objects that haven't been mapped here. And so I'm going to go in and focus in on this area here and some down here in the Stinging Fork Trails State Natural Area and just talk about what it's like, the process to think about doing remote satellite mapping, because I am presently in Colorado and where I move about is more in the Western. So this is the idea of being a remote mapper. But I'm also going to show you what it's like to be a mapper that lives in a certain place or has been somewhere where you can add more detailed knowledge. And those are two very different kinds of ways of adding data to the map. So I'm also going to bounce over to a place in New Mexico to show you what it's like if I've been there and I know how to do things a little bit better. All right, so you'll notice up here, there's an edit piece that's not quite lit up yet, but if I zoom in more to the area, I'll be able to have that edit option turn on. But what I want to do is first think about what I'm trying to add to this map. And so it was suggested that we look at the Cumberland Trail. And I've got this verified group that works on building this trail. They have a website. I can look and see their interactive map of this area. And just to kind of get us into that same place, right here, there is this yellow line that if I look at their legend, that's new trail that they're putting in. And then the Cumberland Trail also has pieces that are open trail. So I can zoom in here and get some verified information about that same region of where I'm looking to map. So that Stinging Fork Falls area is the same as this area down here, right? So if I zoom in, all of a sudden this edit becomes available to me. And I can click on it or I can pick different editing options, but I'm going to stick with that ID option to edit for this demonstration. Now, once I click on that, I get this satellite imagery of the area that I'm interested in. And if I zoom in more, because it still says to actually do some things in here, I need to zoom in to be able to see some of the objects that are here. I'm going to hit a keyboard shortcut on my computer that's just a W for wireframe, and it's going to toggle how I see the data that is already in OpenStreetMap. So if I look at this region, I know that going back to this Cumberland area, there's this whole new trail piece that should be coming in, but it's up in that forest, right? So that's a little bit strange to think about. How do I map that? But I've got different kinds of layers on the side over here that I can look at and say, maybe if I switch to a different kind of layer, I can get a different seasonal capture and see what that landscape looks like if it's in leaf-off conditions, for example. And perhaps I can hit my wire key again so that I can get a better look at that imagery, and I can zoom in and I can start seeing traces of a trail in some of that area. And so I can see things in satellite that I can then double check and verify with data that I can see online from some kind of source that tells me, yes, that is a real trail that some land manager wants to have existent in OpenStreetMap for that area that they look at. So that's kind of a process of kind of looking at some verified information and then thinking about what you might actually want to map. So let's go a little bit further north, and we're going to start in on this area and do like the beginning edit that is the most basic edit that we tend to teach people when they're first doing something in OpenStreetMap. And that is looking for a building. It's very easy to map these and identify them because we can tell from the shadows where they are. And so I'm going to click area, and then I can go and go around this and outline the roof. I'm going to square that building so it has a nice shape, but then you'll notice that this area has no descriptive tags. I want to be able to say this area is a particular thing. And so when I add the attributes on the side, I'm going to say, okay, that's a building. I don't know anything else about it because I am not there, but I can say it's a building and have it equal to yes, and say that is one thing that I would like to map in this area. I can also do some research and look at some other things that are here. So this is called Radar Tower Road. I did a little bit of pre-investigation to kind of figure out what this object is right here. And I found out that it is a VORTAC beacon station. So it's for airplane navigation. And I could verify it with the lat long that they gave it here. So this is something that I feel comfortable about adding into OpenStreetMap. So I'm going to map this as a point where that beacon is, and I'm going to add that on as well. And I can add some information about where I got that information by saying when I want to save this. So you'll notice over here, I've had some things change that I can upload. And when I do that, then I can say my source for the beacon was that website. And I can add that kind of comment so that another mapper that comes in later and sees what I've done, they can understand what I've done and have that kind of conversation about it. So you'll see that my changes, I've created a building and I've created a beacon based on some information that's there. And I can click upload and that will go straight to OpenStreetMap. All right, so that's pretty easy, right? Let's think about trails and how it is to map trails and what does it mean to add information that is going to go into these things like Gaia and all trails. So I can look at this leaf off imagery and I can see that there is on the other side of this radar tower road over here, a trace of a trail that's in here. And I could start adding it. But there are some other things here that are a little bit weird that I might want to adjust or think about first, because if I try just adding this trace that's sort of floating out here in the middle of the woods and isn't connected to anything, OpenStreetMap might be a little bit grumpy at me because it likes having things connected, right? You'll notice if I zoom out that this road doesn't quite match up with what we're seeing on the ground. And so I can click on this and get some information about how this has been mapped. I'm not going to do this now, but this needs some adjustments, right? It is called a residential road, but from looking at this, there aren't any residential houses around. Also, it's not matching up with the trace. And then this trace that's right here is not really sitting on this road over here. So if I scroll down, I can see that this is also from the Tiger import that happened a while ago. So I'd want to come back here and fix these things and move this road back over to where it actually exists, because the imports are not always great, because that data is not always perfect either. And so I'm going to hold off on thinking about putting in this trace of this trail right here, because it connects to the road, but I kind of want to adjust that road so that I can draw that trail right off of it. Just to orient people to our trail that we're looking at in relation to the Cumberland Trail, we are up here on Hinch Mountain. Here's where our radar tower is. And here's that trace that we can see in the imagery, but there's a lot more going on that we can't quite see there, right? So what I'm going to show you is a trick of how to do some great mapping if you are local and you can go out and hike this lovely thing, right? So I am going to click on this OpenStreetMap to back out of my editing session. I've uploaded my 2 edits that I've already done. And I'm going to bounce to New Mexico because that is a place that I go to often. It is, Los Alamos is my hometown. And what I'm going to do is edit a little bit of a trail here that needs some help. So I'm going to go back into an edit session in this area, and you'll notice that this imagery here, it looks pretty different because I'm in a more desert environment. And if I check the background imagery that's possible here, I'll notice somebody has some 3-inch ortho imagery for this area, which is really great. Before, we were looking at Bing maps back in the Cumberland Trail area, but you can pick your base and see what it looks like in different times. And if it doesn't have the date written in it like this one does, you can do a Control-Shift background that will give you the information of the imagery and the date that it's in, the metadata that might be there. So that's kind of a neat little trick. So if I was looking at Bing, then I can see that this imagery was captured in 2021. Sometimes that information isn't there, but it's a nice trick to know. But here's the really great trick. I am familiar with this place. I know it. I've been on the ground, and so I can put in the name of a building here, or I can say it's a house or say the address because I know it well. But I can also do this thing where if I have done something where I've taken my own geospatial data on a hike that I've done or a bike ride, I can drop it into this editor and I can see it directly while I'm editing. So I can refer to it and make an adjustment to some data that's already there that might need some help. So this trail right here, and let me turn my the data back on so it's a little bit bigger. It's missing this switchback that I don't want to import my GPX trace in there directly because honestly, this trail is steep and I was walking my bike and I was stopping and resting here. So I need to trace this in and adjust this, but I'm looking at this and I'm looking at, let's go back to our ortho imagery, which is really great. And you can see that switchback and how that trail is mapped over here. And maybe what I want to do is adjust this And I can actually move these vertices and say, all right, I'm going to take you back and add you in and readjust the routing on this based on looking at the imagery and looking at my own GPS data. So that is a really, really great thing that you can do, is if you are local to an area and you've hiked a trail, you can bring that in. I'm gonna back out of those edits and not upload that right now. I want to do it a little bit more carefully later, but for the sake of this demo, I just wanted to show how you could drop that GPX track in. So that brings me back to, what can I do if I am looking at an area that I'm not familiar with and I don't have my own GPS traces there, but I have done some checking, and I'm going back to our Cumberland Trail area again, but I've done some checking and I know that I've got this verified source where they have these trails, and maybe this area up here on the north end, we have this trail that's not new, but they think, you know, it's open for people to go on it. It looks a little funky up here. Is that really the trail, or is this just a GIS person who had kind of drawn in what they think the end of it might look like, for example? But we know that there's a verified source that this trail ought to be there, right? So I can go into my editing session again. And now, instead of saying, I'm just going to try and base just directly off of the satellite imagery that I see here, I can add different things that will help me see what's going on in this area. A lot of people will load GPS traces up to OpenStreetMap. And so you can turn these on and see what's in the neighborhood. So it turns out that somebody has already hiked this area on Brady Mountain and they loaded that in, which is very probably the source of the data for this trail that has been mapped. So if you only have one trace, these things are not terribly accurate. So when you digitize that trail in, you might want to take it with a grain of salt. And as people have more and more traces, it can become better data. So I'm going to go ahead and come into this area. Let's see, let me turn this off. I just need to orient myself back to our Justin P. Wilson Cumberland Trail Park, because if we look in here and see what trails do exist, then there's only this one. But if we look at what they have, this is here in OpenStreetMap already, but this loop and these trails over here are not in there yet. So here is the secret Strava goodness that I promised in the chat. There is a thing called Strava's global heat map. And I can zoom in to parts of this and see if there has been a lot of activity or any kind of hiking in the areas that I'm interested in mapping. And it turns out that in here, people have done part of this trail already. The new trail, maybe parts of it, you can see a little bit here and there. But there are different ways that you have actually done this already. And I can change the symbolization and how it looks. And there's this great little Chrome plugin that a member of our Trail Stewardship Working Group has. He's the developer that built this. You can go into Chrome Web Store and say, I want the Java OpenStreetMap Strava Heat Map plugin. And to do this, you have to be you have to log into Strava, but you can do it with a free account. So you don't have to pay for Strava to do this. You can just become a member. And what this gives you is it gives you this code that you can plug in for a tile server and use that as one of the custom backgrounds when you're doing the editing. So if I go back into edit mode and I go into my layers and I click custom, I've already loaded this, but there is a place where you can paste in that tile server piece. And then as a background, instead of satellite, I can actually have this imagery of where somebody hiked on a trail. So I'm comfortable tracing this in because I can see it in the Cumberland Trails Association group. It is here, and so I've got two different sources that make me feel like it's okay to put this in as a real trail. So now I'm going to select line, and I'm going to connect to this other trail because we like networks. We like things associated with each other. And I'm just going to be kind of rough about this because there haven't been a lot of people that have Strava'd this, but enough that I feel okay. And I'm trying not to join the links of this park boundary. I want to be careful about the different nodes that I do connect to. And then once I have that in there, I'm going to add attributes that are associated with this trail that help renderers like Gaia and AllTrails understand what it is with the data that we put in. So I'm going to say it's highway equals path. And then when I click on that, there's some other options that are in here. For example, the name. So I can go back to here and say, oh, it's the Selby Loop Trail, and add that into my data. There are a lot of other things that I can add to this as well before I upload it. And there are some really important things that the Trail Working Group has been working on to coordinate with land managers and different navigational apps about how we do this tagging. Because if we don't do anything but just highway equals path, that trail might show up very, very strongly, which is fine in this case because it's a very definitive trail that is, you know, we have this verified information about it. But maybe it's something that we are only seeing from satellite imagery and we don't know much about it. And maybe we should put that it's an informal trail if we're not sure, if we can't find anything on the web about it being true. So we recommend saying informal equals yes, because maybe it's a desire line, just a social trail that comes up. So the working group has gone through a lot of these different kinds of things about how do we, what are the most important tags to put on trails that help renderers not lead people into environmentally sensitive places or only map the ones that does have an operator where we could say, okay, it's the Cumberland Trail Association, or this is the kind of data that we want to add to it. So that is all that I wanted to demo for everybody, but I do want to say that our OpenStreetMap US page is a little bit different than the OpenStreetMap.org where you go to edit, but this is where Brecken got a hold of us. I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back to Jess because she has some contact information for us.
Great, thanks, Diane. So yeah, that's just a small chunk of OSM and rapid fire presentation and demo. There's so much more to dive into. If you have any questions, if you want to learn more about the work we're doing, feel free to go to the website there. On the slide, we'll also share in the chat. That QR code, though, that goes to a sign-up form. If you're interested in receiving training on how to do mapping, feel free to sign up. We don't have anything scheduled, but based on interest, we might reach out and let you know when something is on the calendar.
Thank you guys so much, Jess and Diane. That was an amazing live demo. That Strava heat map is so cool. I feel like minds were being blown based on the traffic in the chat. So cool. We really appreciate it. There have been a couple of questions coming through in the chat, and Jess has been answering them as they have come in. We did just get a question from Lynette about whether culverts are a structure option, and it looks like yes, and the wiki for how to do that is in the chat. We do have a question from Spencer. Can you show us how one can add a layer from Strava or an existing data set, like administrative boundaries? Is that custom feature that you were showing earlier, Diane?
Yeah, so you can have that custom layer if there's a tile server, and you can pull that in that way. There is, as I was showing, when you pick your editor, there is another editor called JOSM, or it's a Java-based OSM editor. And that is, if you're really looking for base data that you can trace off of, that one is it's more complicated, but it's much better at being able to have different data layers loaded into your editing project. So I would look up JOSM tutorials.
Okay, thank you for that. We do probably have 3 or so minutes for questions before I need to wrap things up on my end. We've got a fairly manageable group today. If you want to just pop yourself off of mute and speak up, please feel free, or you can continue to type questions in the chat. I see Emily's hand.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you all so much for all this information. I was exploring the website during the presentation, and I noticed the tasking manager section and all the different campaigns. How does one create a campaign and sort of develop that process?
Yeah, I can answer that. Thanks for bringing that up. That's a really important part of the work that we do and accessing the volunteer community. So if there is a need on your end that you want to rally volunteers around, you can reach out to us and we can share resources on how to set up and manage a good project. And then really all of it takes is having an OSM account and knowing the area you want to map. And then that can be set up. Those requests go out to volunteers. So I'll share that link in the chat for other folks. But yeah, that's a way to really access the volunteer community. For example, with the recent floods in Vermont that happened a couple months ago, the Vermont Emergency Management Agency needed data on where buildings and roads were. And so a project was set up on the tasking manager and volunteers came together and have been mapping all of that. So yeah, tons of different projects and use cases. Doesn't have to be an emergency. It could be, we want to map the culverts in Louisiana. It might be harder to map, but definitely something that can be put together.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And I saw the toggle at the top to show the map. And so it's kind of cool to zoom into different places across the area that I'm in to explore those tasks. So awesome. This is great. Thanks.
Thanks, Emily. Any other questions? Maybe take one, maybe 2 more.
I'll just jump in with one.
Sure.
And Amy might appreciate this, although I don't know if it was already answered in chat. But what would you guys recommend is the best way for folks to pull data from OSM and sort of use it for internal projects that they have going on?
So there's a number of different sources, and a lot of it depends on your scope of how large of an area you're looking for, or if it's a particular kind of feature that you want to pull. So there is an API called Overpass, and Overpass Turbo is a thing that you can Google. It's an online space that you can grab data from, but there's also a place called GeoFabrique that supplies large data sets that Amy is already familiar with, who's pulled a lot of this for the blueprint. So those are two sources, and I'll put the Overpass Turbo link in the chat, but I'm not sure if this was already in there, but I wanted to put the Learn OSM link that I promised I would put in into the chat, so it's there now. And I'll go ahead and get the Overpass Turbo one in as well while Hillary's wrapping up.
And to add on to that really quick, sorry, Hillary, if you don't mind. If you are a GIS user, if you're using ArcGIS or QGIS, most systems that work with geospatial data these days have plugins or other ways to directly download that data. So you can pull down very specific data sets. So if you just need to have the trails for an area, you can pull those in with a query. I do want to mention, if since a lot of folks are used to working with Esri products, there are OpenStreetMap feature layers that are available in like ArcGIS. Should note though that those are curated. So it might not be all of the information available. So they've curated specific attributes for those features. So if you wanted to use, say, a road feature layer in Esri, it might not have all the attributes that are available. So it's always a good practice to see what's in OSM in addition to those curated feature layers.
That's awesome.
I just added in the plugin for QGIS.
I didn't realize that you could, that there were built-in plugins for ArcGIS and QGIS. So this is really helpful.
Fantastic. We needed a 3-hour webinar today. We only have the 1-hour slot, but this has been such a rich discussion. I'm going to wrap up just really quickly previewing next month's webinar, but I will pause again at the end in case other questions arise. I don't know if Jess and Diane have another commitment after this, but their time permitting, we could maybe hang out for a couple of minutes and answer additional questions. I just wanted to let you all know that next month's web forum, it's going to be September 21st, same time, same connection. Information is today. We're going to be talking about efforts to develop a river cane indicator to represent its natural and cultural importance within the Southeast Blueprint. We have 3 amazing fellows who spent the summer with SECAS working on river cane: Alyssa Kwan, Jennifer Byram, and Levi West. They've been working with Indigenous nations in the Southeast to develop a river cane indicator while supporting tribal data sovereignty, Indigenous management of river cane habitat, and tribally led restoration efforts and relationships with river cane. You might have attended our presentation by Roger Kane earlier this year that talked a lot about river cane restoration efforts, and we're looking to better represent this really critical plant species in the blueprint. So definitely tune in if you're interested in learning more about what our fellows have been up to with river cane this summer. I always like to end on this slide for how to get more involved with SECAS. I encourage you to join our newsletter at secassoutheast.org. That will get you our monthly newsletter and a monthly reminder email about this web forum, so you'll never miss a great topic. Of course, you can always connect with your SECAS staff, many of whom are on the line today. Our contact information is on the staff page. And then please check out the blueprint on the blueprint page of our website. Let us know how it's working for you, and user support is available if you would like support to incorporate the blueprint into a funding proposal, into a decision. We are here to help you, and that's all completely free. So that's all I have. So we can pause again for questions and see if anything has occurred to folks in the meantime. All right, I'm not hearing anything. So a huge thank you to Jess and Diane. I know we do a lot of live demos. A good live demo takes a lot of time and prep work. So it's clear y'all did a lot of prep for that. We really appreciate it. Thank you everybody for tuning in. And yeah, feel free to sign up with that QR code that they shared earlier if you're interested in learning more about OpenStreetMap. I'm sure we'll be continuing to deepen this collaboration and take more advantage of this amazing data source as we move forward through the blueprint revision cycle. So thanks again, everybody.